It's the kind of story that never leaves you. A mother's love, forever bound to the memories of a child who should have outlived her. I look at the photo on the wall every day. My son, my little boy, the one who changed everything about me. I had so many hopes, so many dreams for him. But life isn't what we expect it to be. And sometimes it feels like fate can be so cruel. When I first found out I was pregnant, I was overjoyed. My husband and I had been trying for months, and the day the test turned positive, I couldn't stop crying. I imagined a world filled with laughter and happiness, a family of three, perfect in every way. The doctors told me everything looked fine. He was growing, healthy, and strong. Those were the happiest days of my life. I could feel him moving inside me, his tiny kicks telling me that everything was going to be okay. I wanted nothing more than to hold him in my arms. The day he was born felt like a miracle. I'll never forget that first cry. It was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. I looked down at him, and for a moment, everything else in the world disappeared. My baby boy was here. I named him Lucas. It was a name that had been passed down in our family, one I had always imagined saying when the time came. But the joy was short-lived. At first, things seemed perfect. Lucas thrived, he smiled, he giggled, and he learned to crawl. But soon I began to notice something wasn't right. He wasn't hitting the milestones like the other babies. I didn't want to believe it, but deep down I knew. I remember taking him to the pediatrician, hoping for reassurance. But when the doctor's face went serious, when I saw the concern in his eyes, I knew. He had a condition, one I had never heard of. They told me it was a rare genetic disorder, one that would limit his life in ways I couldn't even understand. My son, my beautiful, perfect boy, wouldn't live the life I had imagined for him. I remember walking out of that office, my knees shaking, my world falling apart around me. How do you accept that your child will not grow up? How do you prepare yourself for something like that? The doctors tried to be kind, but the words they spoke felt like daggers. Life expectancy, 2 to 3 years. I remember hearing those words, and they still haunt me to this day. How do you process that kind of loss before it even happens? How do you prepare yourself for the inevitable? But I tried. I tried to stay strong. I loved him with all of me. I held him every day, kissed him every night, and I told him how much I loved him. I remember him smiling at me as if he could understand everything I was saying. He was such a little fighter, so full of life despite the odds stacked against him. I held on to the moments, the laughs, the giggles, the first time he said, "Mama." I stored them all in my heart, knowing that one day they would be all I had left. As Lucas grew, so did my understanding of the depths of his condition. It wasn't just the diagnosis that hurt. It was the slow, cruel realization that the future I had dreamed for him would never come. Every step, every milestone became a reminder of how fleeting our time together was. His small hands, his bright eyes, his infectious laughter. These became precious memories, each one more valuable than the last. I watched him struggle to hold a toy, his tiny fingers trembling as he tried to grasp it, knowing that with each attempt, the muscles in his body were weakening. I saw his legs start to buckle beneath him, his body unable to keep up with the demands of even basic movements. The doctors told me that his muscles would continue to deteriorate, and eventually he would lose the ability to walk, to talk, to breathe on his own. I wasn't prepared for that. How could anyone be? The hardest part, though, was seeing the change in him, the fear that would flash in his eyes whenever he couldn't do something as simple as play with his toys, or when he couldn't keep up with the other children at the park. He didn't understand what was happening to him, but I could see the confusion and sadness on his face. It broke my heart every time he looked at me, asking with his eyes, "Why can't I do what everyone else is doing?" I could barely hold myself together, especially on the days when the inevitable progression of his illness would show its ugly face. I would hold him close, as though my love could somehow stop the inevitable, as though I could protect him from the cruel hand that fate had dealt. But the truth was, I was powerless. There were days when I thought maybe things were getting better. There would be a small glimmer of hope. He would smile at me, his face lighting up with a burst of energy, and I would think, Maybe the doctors were wrong. Maybe there's a chance he'll grow stronger, that he'll defy the odds. But those days were few and far between. The flare-ups, the sudden weakness, the trips to the hospital, they always came back, like clockwork, stealing what little hope I had left. I started to stop counting the days, because counting them felt like counting down to the inevitable. Lucas's condition was progressing faster than I ever could have prepared for. I'd hold him tighter at night, sometimes whispering in his ear, telling him how much I loved him, how proud I was of him, even though he had no idea what was coming. But it wasn't just the physical toll it took on him. It was the emotional cost, the way it drained us both. I could see the weariness in his eyes, the longing for a life he could never have. I could see it in my own eyes too. The woman I used to be, who dreamed of a full, happy family, slipping away into a shell of herself. I stopped asking why after a while. There was no answer, and I was tired of looking for one. Instead, I focused on the moments, however brief, that I had with Lucas. The quiet mornings when he would rest his head on my shoulder, the nights when he would hold my hand as he fell asleep, and the moments when he would smile at me, the most innocent and beautiful smile I had ever seen. I promised myself I would not waste a single second of his life in sorrow. As the months passed, the changes in Lucas became more and more apparent. His once vibrant eyes, full of mischief and wonder, grew dimmer, his small body growing weaker by the day. His laughter, which had once been the soundtrack to my every morning, began to fade, replaced by long periods of silence, punctuated only by his labored breathing and the soft sound of his fingers twitching as though they were struggling to move. He stopped being able to lift his arms, his hands now limp by his sides. I remember the first time I tried to pick him up, and his body, once so light and filled with energy, felt like it was made of stone. I could feel his fragility, and it terrified me. I wanted to hold him, to protect him from the world and from his own body that was betraying him. It wasn't just the physical changes. The light in his eyes, the sparkle of a child who had yet to see the world in all its ugliness, was starting to dim. He no longer asked me to play with him, no longer reached for the toys that once fascinated him. I could feel his spirit fading with each passing day, and it was the most painful thing I had ever experienced. The hardest part wasn't watching him struggle to do the simplest things. It was watching him understand that he couldn't do them anymore. He wasn't even 3 years old when he started to realize it. I'd catch him staring out the window, his small face pressed against the glass as he watched other children run and play. I wanted to tell him it was okay, that someday he would be able to run and play just like them. But I knew better. I knew that those dreams would never come true for him. One afternoon, I sat with him on the couch, cradling him in my arms as I did when he was an infant. His body felt so frail against mine, and his breathing was shallow. His eyes met mine, and for the first time in weeks, he spoke. "Mommy, why can't I run? Why can't I play like the other kids?" My heart shattered in that moment. I could feel the weight of his question, the depth of his confusion and pain. I could feel it in every inch of my body, in the tear that slipped from my eye before I could stop it. How do you answer a question like that? How do you explain to your child that life is not fair? I took a deep breath, wiped away the tear, and held him tighter. "I wish I could make it better, baby, but you are the strongest little boy I know, and I will always be here to hold you. You are perfect just the way you are." It wasn't the answer he wanted. It wasn't the answer I wanted to give, but it was the only truth I could offer him. The days started to blur together after that. The pain was constant, lingering like a weight I couldn't shake off. There were moments when I could see his tiny body struggling to breathe, his face pale and strained, and all I could do was watch. I felt helpless. The doctors did everything they could, but they had no answers. They could only offer us time we didn't have much of. The disease was relentless, and nothing seemed to slow it down. But even in the midst of this overwhelming sorrow, there were fleeting moments of grace. Lucas still smiled. Even though his body was failing him, there were moments when he would smile up at me, his eyes sparkling with the love he had always known. It was as if, in those moments, the world outside didn't matter, and all that mattered was the bond we shared. The hospital visits became routine. We spent long hours in sterile rooms, surrounded by machines that beeped and hummed, measuring his every breath, his every heartbeat. I tried to stay strong for him, but every time I saw him struggle, I could feel myself falling apart. But he never gave up. He was so brave. Even when the pain became too much, he would hold my hand and tell me, "It's okay, Mommy. I'm okay." His words were like a balm to my wounded heart. How could he be the one comforting me? As Lucas's condition worsened, the small moments of joy became harder to come by. I remember one of the last times he smiled at me before the pain took over completely. It was a Sunday morning, and I had him sitting in my lap as I gently combed his hair. He looked at me with those bright eyes, his little hands resting on my arms, and in that instant, everything seemed almost normal. "Mommy, I'm ready to go play outside." His voice was weak, but there was a spark of hope in his words. For just a moment, it felt like the Lucas I had known, the one who wanted to run, to jump, to explore. I smiled at him, but I knew deep down that those dreams of playing outside, running freely with the other children, were slipping away like sand through my fingers. I had to tell him the truth. "I'm sorry, baby. You're too tired today. Maybe tomorrow." The words broke my heart as soon as they left my mouth. I knew he wanted to hear something different, something that would give him hope, but I couldn't lie to him anymore. Tomorrow never came. Days turned into weeks, and the trips to the hospital became more frequent. The machines were now part of our daily life. The beeping of the oxygen monitor, the sound of the IV drip, the way he would flinch at the needle pricks. I would try to hold his hand, to comfort him, but nothing seemed to ease his suffering. I could only watch as the life I had once dreamed of for him slipped further and further away. There were nights when I would lay beside him, our bodies close, my hand on his chest as I listened to his labored breathing. I would pray for him to be free of pain, for him to find peace. But I knew in my heart that time was running out. On one of those nights, as the silence in the room grew heavy, Lucas looked at me with an expression I'll never forget. It was a mixture of confusion and fear, as if he knew something was wrong but didn't fully understand it. His little voice trembled as he whispered, "Why can't I sleep, Mommy? Why does it hurt?" How do you explain that to a child? I could barely hold it together as I kissed his forehead and whispered, "I know, sweetheart. I know it hurts. But you're so strong. You're my brave boy, and I will always be here with you. Always." But inside, I was breaking. I could see him fading right before my eyes, and every time I held him, every time I whispered those words to him, I knew we were running out of time. It was around that time that I started to notice the small changes. His skin, once so soft and warm, began to feel cold. His hands sometimes stiff and unresponsive. His once lively voice began to fade into a quiet rasp. But even then, he would try to comfort me. "Mommy, I'm not scared. I'm just tired. I'll be okay." But as much as I tried to reassure myself, I knew better. His little body was fighting so hard, but the fight was slipping away. He had already given everything he had. And then, one afternoon, as the sun streamed through the window, casting a soft golden glow on his face, Lucas let out a long breath. It was a peaceful sigh, the kind that children make when they fall into a deep sleep. But this time, I knew it wasn't just sleep. My baby boy was gone. The room, which had once been filled with the sounds of his laughter, his cries, his questions, now felt impossibly empty. There was no more noise, no more movement. The stillness was unbearable. I held him in my arms for what felt like hours, my tears falling onto his lifeless body, kissing him again and again, whispering my love for him, knowing he could never hear me again. I didn't want to let him go. I couldn't, but I knew I had to. And as I finally kissed him one last time, I whispered the only words that seemed to matter. "I love you, Lucas, forever." The days after Lucas passed were a blur. The world seemed to go on, as it always does, but for me, everything had stopped. The house felt emptier than it ever had before. His toys, once scattered around the floor, now sat untouched in the corner. His little shoes, which he could never quite tie on his own, remained by the door, waiting for a foot that would never again step into them. It was as if everything I had known, Everything that had made me a mother had been taken from me in an instant. I felt like I was suffocating, trapped in a world where nothing made sense anymore. How could the world keep spinning when my world had come to a halt? I tried to go through the motions, planning the funeral, talking to family and friends, pretending that I was okay. But the truth was, I wasn't. How could I be? My heart was shattered, my soul fractured in a way I didn't think it could survive. At night, I would sit in the nursery, staring at the empty crib. The silence was deafening. I had once imagined nights filled with the gentle hum of a lullaby, the quiet sound of Lucas breathing peacefully, in the warm feeling of his tiny hand in mine. Instead, all I was left with was the haunting emptiness of a room that no longer served its purpose. One night, as I sat in that very room, I felt something I hadn't felt since Lucas's death, a sense of warmth. At first, I thought it was just my mind playing tricks on me. Grief can make you feel things, can distort your senses. But it wasn't just the warmth of the room, it was more than that. I closed my eyes trying to steady my breath, but then I felt it, a small, familiar hand resting on my shoulder. My heart skipped a beat, my breath catching in my throat. I knew this feeling. It was Lucas. I turned quickly, but the room was still empty. There was nothing there, no one standing beside me, just the quiet stillness of the nursery. But as I sat there, I felt a peace settle over me, a feeling that this wasn't the end. Lucas was gone, yes, but he had left something with me. His love, his spirit, it would never truly leave me. I didn't know if it was just my grief whispering to me, or if it was truly him. But in that moment, I felt a flicker of hope. The days that followed were difficult. I still found myself crying at the oddest times, missing him in ways I couldn't explain. I missed everything about him, his voice, his smile, the way he held onto my finger with his tiny hand. But with each passing day, I began to heal. Not in the way people expect, not in the sense that everything would ever be okay again, but in a way that allowed me to carry his memory with me. I started to remember him without the overwhelming sadness. Instead, I could remember the good, the joy he had brought into my life, the lessons he had unknowingly taught me about love, strength, and the depth of a mother's heart. The first time I laughed again, it felt foreign, like I was betraying him. But I realized that Lucas would have wanted me to laugh. He would have wanted me to find joy again. And slowly, I did. I began volunteering, helping families in similar situations, offering them comfort when I knew exactly how they felt. I shared Lucas's story with others who had lost children, and through their pain I began to find my own purpose again. But there was always that piece of me missing, the piece that was Lucas. On his birthday, I went to the park where we used to play, where I once watched him run around with a smile on his face, full of life. I sat on the bench and closed my eyes, remembering his laugh. I smiled through my tears, and I whispered into the wind, "I love you, Lucas, always and forever." As time went on, the days became more manageable. The deep, raw pain of Lucas's loss began to fade into something more bearable, something I could carry with me without feeling as though I might break at any moment. The memories of him, though still painful, began to bring me more comfort than sorrow. I would find myself laughing at the funny things he used to do, remembering his unique way of looking at the world, his innocent wonder at even the smallest things. I started to find joy in the simplest of moments again. I would watch the sunrise each morning, knowing that Lucas had once been so full of life, and while he was no longer physically here, his spirit still lived on within me. I would smile when I saw other children playing in the park, remembering how he had wanted to run, to jump, to be just like them. But it wasn't just the memories of him that kept me going. It was the way he had shaped me as a person, the way his brief time on this earth had shown me what true love meant, how fragile life was, and how deeply I could care for someone. He taught me the true meaning of strength. I began to share his story with others, not as a tale of sorrow, but as one of love and resilience. I joined a support group for parents who had lost children, and there, in the company of others who understood, I realized something. Lucas had not been a tragedy. He had been a gift, a beautiful, brief, and miraculous gift. And though his life had been short, he had made a mark on this world far deeper than many people do in a lifetime. On the anniversary of his passing, I went to the small garden I had planted in his memory. The flowers were in full bloom, their colors bright and vibrant, just like the memories of him. It was my way of remembering, of honoring him. I sat there for hours, thinking of all the moments we had shared, the late nights, the laughter, the quiet moments when I held him close. I looked up at the sky and whispered, "I will always love you, Lucas. You will never be forgotten." As I stood to leave, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time, a sense of peace. Not the peace of forgetting, but the peace of accepting. I had given him everything I could, and in return, he had given me a lifetime of love, even though it was just a fraction of what I had hoped for. I walked away from the garden with my head held high, carrying his memory with me, not as a burden, but as a blessing. And that, I realized, was what Lucas had left me. The strength to keep going, to live fully, and to honor the love we shared every single day.
Subscribe and press the bell icon so that you never miss the amazing video.